Welcome to the No Filter Weekly episode number 4, number 5. Shay, I'm losing
I think
track.
it's I think it's four. I don't know actually. I'm losing track as well. Let's go with five. It sounds better than
clearly,
four.
clearly, we didn't do too well in grade one maths class. Um, how you been, man? What's been going on in your world
Ah,
outside of all the lockdown festivities?
yeah. Nothing much. I think I mentioned to you earlier. I'm just cooking a lot of food these days. Being
Yeah.
being at home.
What have you been cooking? What have you developed a
So
signature Shay dish?
it's a good question. I'm all about easy meals. Like I don't want to spend like 5 hours in the kitchen cooking something and then not being happy with the outcome and realizing I wasted 5 hours. So I'm
Is
all
this based
about
on experience or?
based on experience. Yeah, I've done that in the past, and it's nothing worse than spending a couple of hours trying to cook something amazing and then giving it to people, and they're just like, "That's not so good." So I'm all about oven meals these days, like roasts.
Yeah.
Put a piece of meat in the oven, cut up some veggies, get it in there, keep it in there for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and boom, you got a meal. So trying to make the whole Sunday roasting a tradition in the
Yeah.
family, which is kind of nice. So yeah, that's I'm all about easy meals, easy oven meals. Cook a lot of like salmon and stuff like that as well now. And it's different because now that I've got a 2 year old, like she's eating what we eat now. So you want to make sure that you want to feed her well. So when you feed her well, you end up feeding yourself well because you're cooking meals for everyone in the family. So
Yeah.
it's a different dynamic I've got as well.
Well, that's great that you've got that attitude because I know with it's very easy to fall on the other side of that coin, which is now I've got a child and I haven't got time and I'm just gonna
Yeah.
eat junk food and do the
Well,
easiest
well, it's
thing.
easy. It was easy to fall into that trap before this whole lockdown, but now that I'm at home all the time, it's
Yeah,
like it's a bit easier to do those kind of things. Just get food ready at like 4:35, whereas before I might not be home by then. So it's a kind of different dynamic, and yeah, hopefully it's something that stays on after this whole lockdown situation ends.
yeah, yeah. No, I think I've been going down the other road while I've been in lockdown. I mean, I used to do a lot of cooking. I'd make moussaka and lasagna and all these types of dishes. Whereas during lockdown, I found myself just eating a lot of these my muscle meal packs that you can get from the local
Nice.
grocery store. I mean, they're good. They're high protein, low carb. They're healthy, nutritious. They just save me a
Yeah.
bit of time.
Well, why do you reckon you've got? That's an interesting one. Why do you think you've gone the other way? Like, why are you cooking less now that you're at home all the time, pretty much, or most of the time?
Uh, that is a great question. I have no idea. I think while I was perhaps courting uh, women, shall we say, when I was single, I would,
Good choice of words.
yes, a very diplomatic choice of words. I would then cook more, so to speak, which perhaps doesn't doesn't bode too well for me. I think I should be cooking more now so than then. But
Yeah,
nonetheless, I still am. I'm not saying that I'm not. I'm probably
yeah,
cooking about 2 or 3 times a week. Whereas nowadays, I tend to try and experiment and explore these high protein sort of or low carb alternatives of traditionally carby meals. So I've been
yeah.
making like last weekend we made low carb lasagna. So
Nice.
essentially the pasta sheets were like the whole lasagna, which was probably about 8 slices, had about 40 or so carbs in it, whereas normally you'd be looking at like 250, 300
Heaps.
carbs.
Does it taste the same?
Look, I'm not going to lie to you, mate. It wasn't as good as standard lasagna, but it was
Yeah,
still very enjoyable. However, I've tried like fettuccine and spaghettis and things of that persuasion, which have tasted as good, if not better, than typical pasta. So,
nice.
the options are out there nowadays. Like
Yeah.
if you want to eat pizza, pasta, you name it, you can find healthy versions of that. And if all else fails, just make a thinner crust pizza.
There you go. There's a solution there. So
That's it. So let's jump into this week's news. This week, of course, is Kobe week. Nike is honoring Kobe. It's been about what, a year since his
yeah.
passing.
I don't think it's been that long, has it? I think it
Well,
was no, it's probably less than a year, but I think his birthday's just come up or something, right? I think now it's his birthday
yes,
yesterday or the day
he
before.
would have turned
Yeah,
42 on Sunday,
yeah,
so the day
yeah.
before yesterday.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly when he passed away. I think it was the start of this year, but
hmm
maybe I'm just like I'm losing track of time given we're at home all the time.
So when I first saw this and I saw the advertisement that Nike was putting out, and they're putting out like a week long parade of stuff related to the great man, greatest of all time, according to some. I still put Michael Jordan in that category with Kobe perhaps a close second. I thought, man, Nike's essentially cashing in on the misfortune of one of the greatest of all time. I mean, what are your sentiments on this?
That's probably the last thing I would have thought of.
Yeah.
I kind of, yeah, it's interesting. Like like with Kobe Bryant, I think seems like he really impacted so many people around the world, and basketball obviously, but outside of basketball as well. So I think for me, it's probably just like what we've got on the screen there around lasting legacy, right? Like kind
Hmm.
of continuing on the Kobe Bryant story, and sharing his message, his work ethic, all those kind of things, so future generations can kind of be aware of it as well. Maybe there's that element of let's not, I want to say make the most of it, but it's a good opportunity for them to share that, but also maybe strengthen the brand. I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
I think that's definitely not the priority or the focus. I would hope it's not anyway.
Well, look, they did donate $1 million, which for
Yeah,
Nike isn't a lot of money, to the Mamba and Mambasita Sports Foundation, whose main job is to promote the benefit of sports for kids of all ages. At the same time, they launched some new swag, these black Lakers jerseys with number 8 and number 24, respectively, and a whole line of new Mamba mentality basketball shoes, which you know,
yeah.
to me, that seems like a bit more of a
Well,
commercial,
they're
opportunistic
giving
thing to
people what
do.
they want, right? These
Yeah.
are things that people probably want.
Yeah.
So
And look,
I
I'm
think,
not frowning
yeah,
upon it. I don't think, yes, perhaps there is an element of trying to commercialize this, but at the same time, you're going to sell shoes anyway. People love Kobe
yeah,
Bryant, and it's one way to bring those two things together. And ultimately, look, it is a material capitalist world, for better or for worse, and companies like Nike will do what they can to record a profit, and so that's something
yeah.
that I'm all for as a business person myself.
Yeah, I think they're naming a street after him as well outside Staples
Yeah,
Arena as
I
well,
think it used
right?
to be
So
called
instead, yeah,
LA Road or something, but it's going to be called Kobe Bryant Avenue now.
there you go, nice, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So those things are nice, kind of, it makes sense. Like that was like his home for however many years, like I don't know, 20 years or so, right? So
Mm,
yeah, it makes sense.
definitely, and to the point that we made a couple of weeks ago on player loyalty, like he was one of those
Yeah,
last great players who pretty much spent his whole career at the Lakers. I think he was originally drafted to Seattle, but never played a game for them. Lakers picked
yeah.
up the pick, and he spent his whole career there.
Yeah, it's one of those things as well where there's a lot of young stars in the league who obviously idolize Kobe, like Devin Booker's, and I think Jason Tatum and the Celtics as well. And I think something that the owners of those teams hold is the fact that if they've idolized Kobe, Kobe was a one team player, so they're hoping those young stars will kind of follow in that trend, and
Mm,
give honor to Kobe and kind of be a one team player as well. But given, like we talked about this as well, given yeah, the nature of the business now, and whether it be the corporate world or sports, people chop and change quite a lot more
yeah.
than they used to. So it's a different world as well.
Yeah, and just on that, I mean, he obviously during the early days while he was with the Lakers, or perhaps not so obviously to some non-basketball fans listening to this, like he did want to get traded at a number of times because he found himself playing second fiddle
Mm-hmm.
to the great Shaquille O'Neal. And this brings me to the next topic that I wanted to discuss today. So I literally just published this article on extreme success, and I've very purposely got both Kobe and Shaq in the header image for this article. And this was inspired by a conversation that Shane Parrish had on the Knowledge Project podcast with
Yeah.
Apollo Ono, who was
Oh yeah, I was listening to that this morning. The American it was the Winter Olympics. He was a skater or something, like a speed skater.
yeah. So I'll put it a
Yeah,
little bit more eloquently. 8 times
yeah, yeah.
Olympic
There you go. Yeah,
medalist
literally,
in,
yeah,
in, in speed skating. Yep. So, and I'm not sure if you got to this point in the conversation, but Shane, who is very much a deep thinker, asked the question: can you achieve extreme success whilst living a balanced life? And Shane thought nobody comes to mind.
Yeah.
Apollo basically went off and more or less
Yeah.
said that look, when it comes to sheer performance, it's about obsession, it's about narcissism, insecurity, fear of failure, and some kind of trauma at a deep level that drives people to those heights. But both of them more or less agreed that you can't have
Yeah.
extreme success without, um, just doubling down on one thing and basically not living a balanced life. Now,
Yeah.
what do you think, Shay? Do you think you can achieve extreme success
Uh,
with a
nah,
balanced life?
yeah. I think I got three quarters of the way through the podcast, and that bit was towards the end of it. But when I was listening to that, I haven't read this article, but I'm guessing you touched on it. But I thought of people like your Kobe Bryants and your Michael Jordans who probably put everything they had into the sport, or everything they had into basketball, and you can see it as a result of everything they've accomplished in their careers, what they did accomplish. And yeah, when I was listening to that, I kind of, based on what I would think, I would say that yeah, it's probably very difficult to have that balance, to have a balanced life, and also succeed to the level that those people succeeded. Think of Michael Jordan. If he wasn't as intense as he was, and he kind of tried to have a balanced life, I wouldn't see him being as successful, nowhere near
Yeah.
as successful as what he was.
Well, I think for every example, you can always find,
Sure. Yeah.
uh, you know, counter examples. So one being Shaquille O'Neal. So
Yes.
Shaq, during his off season, during the summers, he would go off, he would party, he wouldn't train, he would eat junk food, he'd drink, he'd record hip hop albums, he'd come back into the preseason like 5, 10% heavier in some cases. And then during the regular season, like Kobe would always give Shaq grief for being lazy. He'd do the bare minimum in training, whereas Kobe would be first one on the court, last one off the court. He'd be in the gym at 5:30 in the morning before sunrise. But despite all of that, despite these disparities, like Shaq went on to win 4 NBA championships, like 15 times NBA All Star. And sometimes I wonder whether or not this success sometimes comes in spite of working hard because it's easy to push yourself to exhaustion and burnout. And my next book, Time Rich, which comes out in October, explores this topic of getting more done with less. And so I went down this rabbit hole and I started unpacking all these different examples of people who haven't pushed themselves to the nth degree, but did achieve rather extreme success. Charles Darwin, for example, he founded the theory of evolution, one of the most groundbreaking theories in all of science. He worked 5 hours a day, including 1 hour for lunch. Joe Rogan, licensed his podcast to Spotify for 100 million US dollars, but also has achieved extreme success in stand-up comedy, sports commentary. Brazilian black belt, Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt, was a national champion in Taekwondo in the United States. And then he also has, he's raising a family. He has numerous interests like bow hunting. So to me, that seems like someone who's achieved extreme success and he's balanced. And then finally, I'll throw one more example in here, which is, say, Bruce Dickinson. So Bruce Dickinson is the singer of Iron Maiden. The band has sold over 100 million albums. But at the same time, he's a professional airline pilot, novelist, Olympic level fencer, radio DJ, bunch of other things, father, husband, you name it. So to me, it's like, well, I think you can achieve that extreme success. And a lot of the science on performance suggests that once you've put in X number of hours a day, whether it's in the athletic domain, whether it's in, say, the business domain or learning a musical instrument, you start to get to that point of diminishing returns. And so you might keep putting in the hours thinking that's what's doing it, but maybe the counterfactual is you stopped several hours ago and you'd be just as good. So,
So I'll kind of counter that a little bit as well. If you take someone like Joe Rogan, you probably know more about his background than I do. Would it be fair to say that maybe in his early years he was very dedicated to kind of get his career up and going? Because you need to build something and then you can kind of get more of a balance as opposed to just trying to do the balance thing from the very beginning.
I
Maybe a lot
agree.
of these people
I
have kind
agree.
of put those hard yards in early. And just before I finish, I want to, you can expand on
Hmm.
it. But with Shaquille O'Neal, would you think that you mentioned obviously he wasn't as intense and dedicated as a Kobe, but that makes me think that imagine if he was right, would we be talking about him as the greatest of all time? Maybe.
Well, or maybe imagine if Kobe took a break and actually let his body recover and his mind invest into other pursuits, perhaps he
Yeah,
could have been even better. Like
maybe.
it's
It's
a
a what if thing, right? We'll never know, I guess, with
yeah.
reality.
Although that what you've asked there kind of brings me to a cheeky comment of Shaq's last year when Kobe got onto Twitter and said, "Man, if Shaq wasn't so lazy, we would have won 12, 12 rings." Uh, and Shaq fired back saying, "Look, if you actually passed the ball, we probably would have won 12 rings."
That's
So there's
right.
that as well. But yeah, just from a science perspective, man, like there's various studies that show, scientists, for example, working 10 to 20 hours a week, being twice as productive as their 35-hour a week colleagues, with 60-hour a week scientists being the least productive of all. And that's because they're just not giving their bodies time to rest, to come back bigger and better. So,
Yeah.
personally, I don't think there is one right answer to this question. I think in all cases, you're going to be susceptible to survivorship bias. So, we're only going to see those people who worked hard who got to the
Yeah.
top, not the ones who worked hard and didn't. And sometimes the media, I think, and people who got to the top also like to permeate this hustle culture, work hard, work the 12 hours. But again, we don't know what they would have
Yeah.
achieved if they had just
It's
taken the foot off the pedal after, say, half the amount of time. So,
same with startups, right? We always hear about the success stories, but you don't hear about those what is it, 95% of startups are fail. You don't hear about as many of those stories as obviously the successful ones.
yeah, definitely. So, look, I think it's an open question, and it's definitely one that I invite our listeners to chime in on over on Instagram or on Twitter or over at the nofilter.media website. Just jump into the comments on that article and let us know what you think. So, we've spent the last 15 or so minutes talking basketball, so I think that's more than enough to tick the sports category for one week. Let's move on. 48 Laws of Power. Are you familiar with the book?
Yeah, I would have read it years ago, but
Yep.
yeah, it was Robert Greene, right? You've had him on your show. You've had some good conversations with him in the past.
Well, one conversation with
Yeah.
Robert Greene on the Future Squared podcast about his book, The Laws of Human Nature. Love his work. I mean, what he essentially does is he explores historical battles, historical figures, and unpacks lessons from, say, history that you can then apply in your life, whether it's in business, in personal relationships, whatever the case may be. And his biggest book of all time is arguably The 48 Laws of Power. Sold millions and millions of copies. And recently, not so recently, a couple of months ago, but it's only something we've decided to cover now. Drake was essentially called up to help produce a new show for Quibi, which is Jeffrey Epstein's new platform, which admittedly isn't doing so well,
Yeah.
but a new show called The 48 Laws of Power, where he basically looks at these laws from the perspective of modern day rappers and things of that persuasion to kind of, I guess it's more of like an infotainment type of play where it's informational. You get life lessons out of it, but at the same time, it's super entertaining.
Yeah, and it's going to be on Quibi, is it? Quibi is it's an interesting one, right? So I've
Yeah.
never used it but I've heard a bit about it. But essentially, they're just targeting mobile users, right? Mobile content. That's pretty much it. There's no you can't watch it on TV or anything. They've kind of optimized that mobile experience for streaming, and but also really short episodes. I think short snippets as opposed to binging on shows. It's about you've got 10 minutes here or there. You watch it on your mobile, and yeah, I think I was listening to, I think it was the Bill Simmons podcast. They talked about Quibi and just how it hasn't really succeeded because they haven't really understood their customers too
Mhm.
well in terms of what they're trying to do. But yeah, it'll be interesting if this, once it comes out, whether it helps drive more traffic to Quibi. I'm sure Drake will promote it to his millions and millions of followers, which obviously helps the cause as well. So it's probably not the worst thing to get Drake involved.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's a form of influencer marketing, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I think Quibi, I wrote an article about it, a case study in terrible leadership, essentially, was the title of the article. I think they've just, yeah, as Bill Simmons said, as you pointed out, they
Yeah.
just misread the market. Essentially, short form content, there's plenty of it out there for free on TikTok, on YouTube, even on Instagram, on IGTV. and the quality of it tends to be somewhat better and more entertaining than what Quibi was putting out. A lot of analysts have actually labeled Quibi's content just stuff that the TV, A grade TV shows and networks basically rejected. It's like the fish that John West rejects go to Quibi essentially.
But even like looking at Drake, it's pretty nuts. Like where he is right now. I remember like he was on this TV show Degrassi or something, right? He's like
Yeah.
some actor, and all of a sudden like he just turned into this hip hop mogul star, and now he's just like one of the most famous people in the world. Yeah, I think he like shared. He had some mixtapes. So yeah, you got some photos of him there. But it's pretty crazy to think, right? This like actor on some kid's teenage show became this rap superstar within years. It wasn't like it took him 20 years after the show. It was like
Yeah.
pretty instant.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm someone who perhaps hasn't really closely followed Drake's career, and probably wasn't even until about 2 or 3 years ago that it really hit my sort of consciousness. I mean, I've
Mm.
always had an appreciation for older hip hop, like 90s hip hop and 80s hip hop, but yeah, he's from my perspective seemed like an overnight success, but based on
Yeah.
what you're telling me, it's very much been the case.
Yeah, well, that's what it seemed like to me as well. And yeah, it's pretty. Look at the photos of him there. He just looks like a bit of a dweeb, and now he's like one of the coolest people on earth, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah, and also a big Toronto Raptors fan.
Yeah, he's always on the sidelines. I think he's actually employed by the team. He's like their ambassador or something. So he was all over the place last year when they won the championship.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, moving on from Quibi to asteroids. Apparently, an asteroid is going to hit Earth just before the US elections later this year.
Jeez, there
It
you go.
is.
If there's an omen,
It's
if I've
happening.
ever
So
seen one.
we should just wrap this podcast up now and spend the next few months doing what we absolutely love. Forget about
Dude,
business. Forget about everything. We are all
how do
dead.
they know how big this asteroid? Because usually these asteroids don't they like come towards the Earth and then just kind of shatter and become smaller and smaller, and then by the
Well,
time they reach us, they're nothing.
you've been watching too much Simpsons, mate.
Yeah, I think so. But I think that's actually true. Maybe I don't know.
No, look,
Maybe
you're absolutely right. So this asteroid is approximately 6.5 feet in width and poses no threat to Earth, according to NASA. If it were to enter our planet's atmosphere, it would disintegrate due to its extremely small
Yeah, the
size.
Simpsons. I'm telling you, man. They they teach us lots of things as kids.
Yeah, although it was somewhat concerning because last week we published something on another asteroid which came within 3,000 kilometers of the Earth, which doesn't sound like a small distance, but actually is in the greater scheme of things. And apparently, it was completely undetected. It went completely undetected by NASA, by everybody who's in this space. Excuse the pun, and which kind of raised some red flags and some concerns about whether or not we'd be able to detect a larger asteroid. And I mean, this is really like a once in several, if not, 50, 100,000 year type of event that uh, an asteroid large enough to, wipe out a percentage, if not a small percentage, or even a small town of humanity could actually eventuate. But it's kind of scary to know that our existing infrastructure perhaps isn't capable of detecting it as well as we thought.
Yeah, yeah, knowing this, yeah, it's kind of worrying, but it's definitely not something we'd ever like think about on a daily basis. But just kind of reading these articles and finding out
Yeah.
that it is kind of like weird, like what else is out there that we don't know is actually coming, which is I'm sure there's a lot, especially 2020. Man, like everything going on in 2020, I wouldn't be surprised if we had a bit of an asteroid issue later in the year,
Look,
as per the article. So
I think for
hopefully
some,
not, but I wouldn't be surprised.
yeah, I think for some people they wouldn't mind an asteroid just wiping everything out right now. And we can start from scratch again, uh, but we'll that remains to be seen. So some of the other news that came to be this week, Google and the ACCC in Australia. So this is actually making news waves over in the United States as well. Uh, the ACCC, essentially Australia's consumer uh, competition watchdog, if I will. Well, the technical word is the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, has basically introduced a new code, which they say is designed to um, level the playing field insofar as, say, Google and Facebook's what they say unfair bargaining position when it comes to ads and distributing content and exposure is concerned. Um, Whereas Google's basically saying, well, you guys are just uh, uh, trying to take money out of our pocket and give it to big media in Australia. So essentially, what the ACCC is trying to do is effectively amounts to a tax on big tech, and to take that tax and give it to News Corp and the likes of Rupert Murdoch, who have lobbied for many years to get something like this enacted. So I was looking into this code, and it actually turns out that it's only available for media companies who have more than $150,000 revenue a year. So, one, it's been criticized as being dishonest, insofar as a tax uh, disguised as a regulation, and well, as a fairness regulation. And number two, um, it it protects incumbents rather than, say, having
Yeah.
a general legislation that supports all media companies. Something like this really just supports those existing media companies who are already established, monetizing, etc., etc. Whereas you would think, hey, if we want to be fair, let's open it up to everyone. Just not
Yeah.
sure if this is the first you've heard of it. You've probably come across
No.
the little notifications on Google
Yeah,
and
that's
YouTube.
what I was gonna say. I don't know if it's there anymore right now, but
Oh, it is.
I think a day or two ago when I was on, and yeah, it had that notification saying Google's at risk or something, or something's at risk, or
Yep.
kind of like flagging. There was a hyperlink or something that took you to like a press release from Google about the issue, I think. But yeah, it's one of those things where trying to take the successful company down, right? They're doing so well, like everyone's using them. It's not just Google, it's YouTube as well. So I think it's Google and
Well,
YouTube that are obviously at risk. I think from a consumer perspective in Australia. So I don't want to pay for anything. I don't want any issues with Google. I don't want any issues with YouTube. I feel like it sounds like the ACCC have too much time on their hands and are trying to cause issues. Do you know when we're going to see a result around this? Are they still going back and forth? Because I think
it's a
from
proposed
what I
law at
yeah,
the moment,
okay, and I
which
think
means it could take months, if not a year.
Google came back with something, and then
Yeah,
ACCC,
so
Triple C came back with something.
yeah, there's been a bit of a tennis match at the
Yeah,
moment. Rod Sims, the chairman of the ACCC, said Google will not be required to charge Australians for the use of its free services such as Google Search and YouTube unless it chooses to do so. And Google basically responded that we did not say that the proposed law would require us to charge Australians for search and YouTube. We do not intend to charge users for our free services. What we did say is that search and YouTube, both of which are free services, are at risk in Australia. And that's because the code, as it is drafted, is unworkable. So, uh, obviously, when you want to further a particular position, you're going to put words in other people's mouths, and that's something that the ACCC has tried to do here by
yeah,
misinterpreting what Google's uh, rebuttal has essentially been. But we'll be watching that space closely, and
for
it's something
sure.
we're seeing all over the world with big tech.
Yeah,
I mean, in America, we talked about Jeff Bezos's antitrust appearance a couple weeks ago,
yeah.
along with Facebook, Apple, and the other one.
Facebook, Apple,
Google. There we
Google.
go.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Google.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Sudha Pichai appeared at Congress for that one. So
that's it.
be interesting. We'll be following that one closely, especially as it affects media companies like No Filter Media specifically. So moving on, I think we are just about. Actually, no, we have a bit more time to get through today. Kanye West. We talked about Drake
Oh
a few
yeah.
moments ago. Kanye West, another prominent rapper, uh, was on Twitter last week talking about music. So Guns N' Roses versus Nirvana. It is a question that many rock fans, especially those fans of music from the early '90s, have debated for about 3 decades now. And Kanye West sparked a great internet debate when he posted this: Guns N' Roses or Nirvana. Thinking emoji, both my favorite. Now, I'm not going to ask you which one you prefer, Shay, because I know you're not a big rock and roll
Well,
fan.
No, no, but it's interesting you bring this up because I remember I think it was last week we spoke about it, or the week before, around kind of trying to listen to new music and not being really focused on the music you always listen to and the recommendations coming in through Spotify and Apple
Yeah.
Music. So I actually have listened to a couple of Nirvana songs, you know, every now and what's that one? Smells Like Teen Spirit. That's probably obviously the probably most famous one that
Yep.
they've got. It wasn't too bad. I actually didn't mind it at all. So but haven't listened to enough Nirvana or Guns N' Roses to be able to make an educated put an opinion against this one.
Fair enough.
But Kanye West, wasn't it just yesterday that he was having a mental breakdown and now he's like, you know, just putting stuff on to
I
like
think
everything's
he,
back to normal.
yeah, I think that's his default state. Like he suffers from
Yeah,
bipolar disorder, and
bipolar. That's what they say. Yeah,
apparently, there is medication that you can take for that. But apparently, the people closest to him, I believe, the Kardashians and his management and people like that. From what I understand, they've advised against him taking those meds
okay.
because that condition predisposes him to his creative breakthroughs. Like, as much as it puts him on these weird tangents where he says stuff that he may later come to regret, like, a lot of his creativity is attributed to, you know, that
Yeah,
condition. And something that people often say when it comes to musicians, comedians, you name it, like, the ones that perform really well have either come from a place of pain or they've got something going on in their lives which just brings that sort of creativity out of them. Whereas if they were kind of straight down the line, everything was
yeah.
all in perfect working order, perhaps that wouldn't be the case.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense actually. And so I guess if we come back to this one then, Steve. So who would you go? Guns N' Roses or Nirvana? Who's your pick? I'm
Uh,
sure you've got a strong opinion on this
I,
one.
it's look, it's I don't know about a strong opinion, but definitely Guns N' Roses for me, and that's because I grew up more on the hard rock and heavy metal side of things, whereas Nirvana was more grunge, alternative rock. And the thing about grunge and alternative rock, like, I think it's probably got more soul, uh, s- but one thing it lacks is, for my money, like musical technical proficiency. Like Guns N' Roses, you're talking about, two guitarists, you're talking about Slash, you're talking about time changes, whereas Nirvana and a lot of those bands like Soundgarden and whatnot was very simple chord progressions on the guitar, maybe three or four chords, no guitar
Yeah.
solos, 3 minute songs, really simple, but lyrically perhaps had a lot more meaning. But for me, it was about balls, it was about, guitar solos and things like that. So Guns N' Roses for me, Appetite for Destruction to this day, I think stacks up as one of the best albums of all time. And if you are still going down that rabbit hole,
Yeah, let's hear it.
check
We'll
out
get on to it.
check out Appetite for Destruction. And if you want to check out some Nirvana, I'd go their MTV Unplugged
All
album,
right.
which is,
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Is this a common comparison that's actually made between these two bands? Because from what you've said and what I've kind of assumed and listened to, they're not. They
I
don't
don't,
seem like they're exactly
yeah.
similar kind of
Look,
bands to compare.
these bands, yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, these bands have had their feuds, especially in the early
Oh,
90s,
okay,
because
okay. They
Nirvana
have views.
represented,
All right.
yeah, Nirvana represented like a
Okay.
new sort of new wave of rock music. And Kurt Cobain looked down at Guns N' Roses, saying their music was meaningless and that sort of stuff. But I think it's probably testament to Kanye's, I don't know, lack of uh, knowledge when it comes to the nuances of rock music, as
Yeah.
which would pose him to ask this question in the first place. Whereas I would never
Yeah.
ask this question. I would probably say Guns N' Roses or Motley Crue, and then I'd probably
Well,
say
yeah.
Nirvana or Smashing Pumpkins or something like that.
Yeah. No, exactly. That's what I was thinking. I was just like they seem like pretty contrasting band. And I like it's like comparing probably like someone like Drake to I don't know like some Britney Spears. Probably not that extreme, but it's like but I think given the background that you just mentioned, that's I guess that's the history. That's what I wasn't aware of that background in terms of the two bands and the competition amongst them.
Yeah, well, I look forward to circling back next week and
Yeah, I'll get
hearing
onto
what you
it.
thought of those
I'm looking forward
records.
to it because it's actually like it's super hard to find songs from other genres on Apple Music. You've actually just got to go through the genre um,
Oh, really?
drop down. But apart from that, everything's directed to for you. And when you're browsing, it's really about things you've looked at before. So it's actually really hard to get out of that kind of history you've created with the music you
That's
follow
that's
and listen to.
interesting. I mean, I tend to use Spotify more than
Hopefully, it's a
anything
little bit better.
else.
I
Yeah,
heard
it's
Spotify is better than Apple Music, but
yeah, it's. I mean, I used Apple Music for all of 5 minutes a few years ago when it came out, and I found that queuing up songs and just pressing play used to take too long. Like there was a several
yeah,
second lag. I don't know what it's like nowadays, but in Spotify, essentially, if you go to your homepage, you have like this Discover Weekly
they're
list.
probably similar songs to what you listen to,
There's
right?
similar songs to what I listen
Yeah.
to, but then you also have these playlists that uh, Spotify curates for you. So on a weekly basis, so I have here, for example, Discover Weekly, a good mix of stuff, and then I have, and these daily mixes are based on different types of music that perhaps you've listened to once. So, for example, Daily Mix One, Rush, Simon and Garfunkel, Creedence Clearwater. So these are all like progressive bands from the 60s and 70s. Then I have like thrash metal in number two. Number three is like European metal. Number four is 70s metal. But then number five, number five is Daily Mix Five. We've got Kid Cudi, Wiz Khalifa, Tupac.
But what you're saying is though, you have to listen to them at least once for it to kind of formulate these daily mixes, right? But if you've never listened to a specific genre, it's not going to come up in what they formulate for you.
Possibly, yeah. I think that might
Yeah,
be the case. So you kind of have to go out and intentionally kind of
yeah,
cultivate your list. Um, Yeah, it's a funny one, like because there is obviously some utility to being served more music or more of the kind of music that you like, but at the same time, it comes at the expense of discovering new stuff.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah,
It's
but I mean, you go even further. I mean, release radar. So this is all the new songs that have come out from artists that I've listened to or are similar to the ones that I listened to. And there's stuff in here that I never would have heard, like My Father's Eyes from Pedrito Martinez and Eric Clapton. And so, I'd listen to that, and that's some, you know, new music that
nice.
gets me out of just listening to the same old songs as
Yeah,
well. Yeah. So I don't know.
nice,
I
nice.
can't speak for Apple Music, but moving on from Apple Music, Spotify has ridden incredible highs since they came out as a company. Obviously, uh, dethroning iTunes as it was pretty much overnight. And speaking of climbing high on the stock market, the S&P 500 basically restored the 50% losses that it recorded back in March due to the pandemic. Like it is now at an absolute high. I mean, this article is from a couple of days ago, but the benchmark S&P then closed at 3,389 points, marking a new record high for the index and effectively gaining back everything it lost due to the pandemic. Now, I don't know where this is coming from. I mean, I do, but when you look at effective unemployment in the United States right now, I think it's in the high teens and predicted to hit like 21%, which is almost at the 25% we had during the Great Depression, 80 odd years ago. People are out of jobs, companies are struggling to pay their existing employees, whoever's left, people are on pay cuts, all sorts of stuff. Organizations are
Yeah.
struggling. Qantas basically had to ground most of its fleet last week because they think that, yeah, because I mean, there's no international travel in Australia. There's, yeah, pretty much nothing right now. Yet the stock market has closed higher than ever before. What do you put this down to?
It's I just find it baffles me, right? And I remember seeing a chart a little while ago that had like previous challenges in our lifetimes, like previous recessions and things like that, and it kind of shows this chart where the first low we hit is not the actual low, like it goes up again and then it drops again and reaches a newer low. But looking at this, it just kind of, I'm just like, is it going to go down or is this it? Have we actually hit our bottom? I like to look at history and base things on history, but it's, I have no idea. But all I know is that I've got quite a few friends that have just taken all their money out of the stock market. They're keeping their powder dry, is what they call it. just for another drop or another change going on. So it's very unpredictable, but the fact that it's gone up so much, yeah, it's very much sentiment driven. It's like everyone's investing in tech stocks. I'm sure Trump's got a lot to do with it as well, especially in the US. I don't know. It's out of control. That's why personally, I get super stressed with the share market. So I try to stick to my index funds. I stay out of investing in shares
Yeah.
specifically.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same. I have most of my spare capital invested in index funds. I set and forget. And even when the economy tanked earlier this year, I didn't take my money out because that would have meant locking in my losses.
Yeah,
I based it on history. And you know what?
that's
History
it.
is not always a perfect predictor of the future. There are black swan events like the coronavirus that we need to contend with. But in
Yeah,
this case, even I was blown away by how quickly it recovered. I thought maybe somewhere between 2 to 5 years we'd be looking at a recovery,
yeah,
but this was like 5 months, which is
yeah.
a record. Like the stock market has never bounced back 50% in a 5 month period. The GFC, it took about 6 to 8 years, I believe, to recover back to the pre-GFC highs. The Great Depression was about 10 years. So for it to bounce back in 5 months, like you say, it's a lot
It's
of
out of
sentiment.
control, right? It's
Yeah,
just like, what is going on?
doesn't make any
And
sense.
yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And it's so hard to pick the bottom as well. Like whoever, there's no one in the world that knows how to pick the exact bottom of a market. And yeah, what do you say? 5 months, right? That's crazy.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So we'll see if it drops again or whether that was it and whether it just stays steady now and
yeah.
continues to rise. I'm guessing there's probably going to be another drop, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think it was Tony Robbins in his book Unbreakable, which was essentially a sales pitch for index funds. But he did make the case in that book by made the case for nobody being able to pick the market, like you've said there, and that these fund managers who supposedly can beat the market. Like he looked at statistics, and over a 20 or 30 year period, you were literally better off just putting your money in index funds and just setting and forgetting, especially
Yeah.
when you account for the fact that a lot of these fund managers will charge you something like 3% per annum in fees. Whereas something like an index fund, and now I sound like a sales pitch, is only charging you about 0.7%. And so compounding over time, like just on that alone, just on that 2.3% difference in fees, you end up way better off. Like that makes it exponentially more difficult
Yeah.
to beat the market and cover those fees for the fund manager. So
We should
yeah,
get an index fund as a sponsor for the next episode.
we should contact Jack Vogel. Is he actually? I don't think he's still alive. Let me just double check. No. Anyway, let's move on from
Maybe
that. uh, let's wrap up with some fun. Well, maybe not some fun. Maybe some controversy. Really, Bill Clinton. Obviously, the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing has been a bit of an unanswered question, a bit of a loose end in the United States. A lot of prominent political figures have been associated with Jeffrey Epstein and his, his, for lack of a better word, sex trafficking ring. I don't know what I'd even call it, but have you seen this photo of Bill Clinton?
No, I haven't, but it looks like he's up to something. Where is that? What's he
Somewhat
doing?
conspicuous.
At a massage parlor, is he?
Well, no, this is bombshell photos show Bill Clinton enjoying massage from Jeffrey Epstein victim. So I don't know how old she would have been, maybe like 15 or 16 at the time. And I'm not sure how familiar you are with it, but Jeffrey Epstein essentially had an island where he would fly prominent people such as Bill Clinton, and it is alleged that they would partake in sexual activities with these minors. And when news of this was surfacing last year, Epstein was in prison and he was supposedly committed suicide. However, there is no evidence of it. The coroner report suggested that he was killed. I believe it was by strangulation. There is a lot of conjecture about this,
Yeah.
and this photo was released just last week, which only adds further fuel to the fire, further in irrefutable evidence, but at the same time also suggests that Epstein was indeed killed by people in power
Yeah.
who didn't want this information to get leaked. I
Yeah,
don't know. I've always
that's well
had
said.
very iffy feelings about the Clinton family in general.
Oh,
Hillary
yeah.
Clinton has always struck me as someone who perhaps has a tendency to lean towards the corrupt side of the spectrum. I don't know what feelings you have gathered from watching this family over the last, say, 25 years or so.
Not too much, but I obviously the biggest thing that's kind of always going to stick with Bill Clinton is the whole Monica Lewinsky thing, right? As well, and I remember she did a TED talk just about how that impacted her life, that whole situation, and how she just got a lot of death threats, bullying, all this stuff, and it really impacted her mental health, and it was a struggle for her to get through it. But that's probably the one thing that always comes to mind whenever I think of the Clintons, especially obviously Bill Clinton.
Indeed, indeed. And just reading through one of the quotes here that came out from this article, which is the private spa session took an awkward turn when the 22-year-old used all the wrong words while asking Clinton to give her a better position for the massage. To which Clinton responded, "I've got a bad angle. Would you mind getting on your knees?" No.
So is this a recording or is this someone said this is what happened? Because
Yeah. Yeah. Look, we're going into some murky waters here.
yeah, I think we are.
I think I'm going to pull back and bring this episode of the No Filter Weekly to a close.
Good way to close it up.
I will see you next week. We'll see you all on the No Filter No Filter Weekly next week. Make sure you are subscribed wherever you listen to it: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Overcast, YouTube. You name it, we are there. Like it, give it a rating, share it with your friends if you enjoy it. Look, this is a bit of fun. We're basically just recapping all the weekly articles and whatnot that appear on the No Filter website. If you'd like to read any of the articles that we have touched on today, head over to nofilter.media and you could read to your heart's content. Shay, enjoy the rest of your week.
You too, Steve. I'll catch you next week.